So thinking back to that retreat, are there any examples that come to mind of specific ways that people were going to find meaning in that upcoming year?
A few examples that came out of the retreat and ultimately people started using in 2009 is whether it was this emotional inventory that I was doing at the end of the week, do an emotional inventory. What were the 3 or 4 most primary emotions you had this week? How did they serve you or not serve you? Next week, how are you going to use those emotions? How are you going to use courage next week? How are you going to use vulnerability? How are you going to use anxiety? How are you going to use anxiety? That's a tough one, but I'll come back to that when we talk a little bit more about anxiety. That was one tool that we used. A second tool was, what's the wisdom I'm going to learn? One of the things that Viktor Frankl proved when he was in a concentration camp is he said, wow, when I could feel that I'm going through the most difficult experience of my life, but when I get out, I'm going to be able to teach that to my grandchildren, that meant a lot to him. That gave him meaning. So you're the leader of an organization. You're going through the most difficult time in your life. You know as well as I know that sometimes your best lessons are when you're actually most challenged. Good. There's a great opportunity for you to say this is a learning moment. It's a painful moment, but it's a learning moment. And when you can see it as a learning moment, the wisdom starts to kick in. Okay, I'm going to learn something here. And you start feeling like, okay, what am I going to learn? How am I going to document it? And then how am I going to use it in the future? And that moves you out of suffering into the meaning.
I've often said that people are story-making machines. In your book, you rephrase it a little bit to say that we're meaning makers. And I think we're both trying to explain this idea that, that we're trying to create a story or meaning around what we're feeling at any given time.
Yeah.
What have you learned about that?
That's how our brain works. I mean, our brain is trying to rationalize things at all times. And so the question is, how are you going to be the script writer in such a way that you rationalize it in a healthy way that is effective in your life? And so the meaning making can be everything from, so what am I going to learn here? How's it going to serve me in the future? That's one way to sort of say, I just lost my leg. Or Helen Keller is a great example. Helen Keller, blind and deaf. She's lost, with 5 senses. She didn't have 2 of them. And yet she went to college at a time when, frankly, very few women ever went to college. So how do we make, how do we make something out of our lives? How do we make meaning out of our lives in a productive way so that it serves us well, especially when something's taken away from us or something looks like it's a challenge or a curse or something that could create suffering. The key is to recognize that. And there's a lot of cliches, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, etc. Fine. Fill your office with all of those posters, and that's good. But do something with it. It's not about just saying the cliches. It's actually literally getting in the trenches, and that's what Emotional Equations does. It helps you go into the trenches and say, okay, I know that I'm really sort of fixated on suffering right now. What am I going to do about the meaning, and how can I elevate the meaning, and what are the practical things I can do daily to help me with that?